Are you a pervert or something? Okay. The whales have a 15-foot penis.
Hold on a sec. I just
National Pornographic says it.
I'm sorry, Ken. You cut out there. They have a 15 what?
The whales have a 15-foot penis. I didn't cut out. You heard me. Google it.
And then we'll get to the questions. Today is going to be more of an informal debate. We've got roughly 15-minute openings. We're going to let John Maddox go first, whatever time he needs. Like I said, roughly 15-minute opening. Then we're going to hand it over to Godless Engineer to give whatever he feels is necessary in terms of a rebuttal. And then boom, right into open dialogue. That's what people like, so that's what people are going to get. Let's break the ice first, though, before we get started. Thanks again for giving us your time. To the debaters, if you guys want to, we can start with John. If you want to go over a little bit about yourself, plug in your channel, what's going on over at your channel. Yeah, go ahead. Thanks for being here, John.
No, I appreciate it.
I guess
sorry.
We're both John. Are you going for? You got to clarify here. GE or JM? What are we doing here?
John 1 and John 2. We'll go.
I'll concede to Godless. Go ahead, man.
There we go.
Okay. So I'm John Gleason, but everybody can just call me Godless Engineer here, I guess. Which I don't know if it's just my stream, but it seems like we're all black on the front-facing stream of this. But in any case, I'm John Gleason, the Godless Engineer. If you guys don't know me, I run a channel here on YouTube as well as other various social media accounts where I analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. That's typically what I want to communicate to people right off the bat. So if you want to, you guys can go and check out my channel here on YouTube.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction. If you like what you're hearing from Godless Engineer, go check out his channel and hit that subscribe button. So let's go over to John Maddox. Once again, thanks for being here, brother. You're no stranger, of course. So
I appreciate you having me. It should be a fun, interesting debate. It's kind of it's interesting that Godless Engineer, what he says he does. I think I had 12 subscribers when he decided to do a response to one of my videos when I first got into this whole game, and that's kind of culminated with this discussion tonight. So it should be interesting to see how things go. But my channel, if you search Logical, Plausible, Probable, do a lot of after shows, different videos and different discussions on different topics. Tomorrow night, 6:30 Central, I've got Dr. Fuzz Rana. He's not going to be discussing abiogenesis chemistry. So let's come over and check that out. Should be fun. But mostly my objective is to take the arguments that are made by atheists, evolutionists, anybody who claims there is no higher power, and reduce them to the ridiculous that they are by pointing out that they are neither logical nor plausible nor probable conclusions to reach about the very aspect and the fundamentals of our existence.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction, John Maddox. If there's anybody in the chat who hasn't yet checked out his channel and subscribed to it, please go check it out. Hit that subscribe button. So enough from me, enough for breaking the ice. Let's get right into the opening statement for John Maddox. John, you've got roughly 15 minutes, but because we're kind of easygoing tonight, what we'll do is once you hit that 14-minute mark, I'll give you a kind of the warning, and then if you go a few seconds over the 15-minute mark, that's cool as well. We'll be easy going tonight, so no rush. Whenever you're comfortable, you can get yourself going. If you need to screen share, we'll make sure we can do that for you as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight has multiple aspects of significance to me personally. August 9th in the year of our Lord 2020 is both my 36th birthday and the date which marks having lived 50% of my life here in the United States and 50% in the place of my birth, the United Kingdom. It also marks facing off against the very first atheist who came after me personally since I started engaging in YouTube apologetics when he supposedly debunked one of my videos. Now, in that light, let this day stand as a line of demarcation for me and to all those who meet me in the future, whether it be in person or in the digital ring of debate in which we are currently engaged. From henceforth, there will be no quarter given to the enemies of our Creator, nor those who refuse to look beyond the pathetic talking points spewed by my opponent and those like him. The verbal weapons you wield are broken. Your arguments are juvenile and lacking in substance. The more I engage with atheists, the more I realize you are mental children desperate to avoid the obvious. That the dogma of naturalism and its foundation of Darwinian evolution is nothing but a cloud of smoke which is decimated by the wind of rational thought and logical analysis. We are told that evolution is a settled and proven science, yet its very foundation is based upon the assumption that information can come from nothing. If this is so, why then does all modern science prove beyond doubt that life cannot reproduce without the genetic code housed in our DNA? In any other context, a person would be considered insane to insist that a language of any kind, spoken or written, could form without consciousness and intellect being required. I ask you, would any rational person argue the numerous languages used for the software and design of hardware required for this debate? Could they possibly somehow spring into existence by chance? Without intelligence and logic, can any of these concepts be devised? I would say no, but I shall let the words of my opponent address this question. I leave the determination of his rationality to you, the audience. This brings me to what my next video will explain in much more detail, and that is the genetic code, and more importantly, the information it contains. Atheists desperately attempt to avoid the premise that it actually contains real information and is not just purely deterministic chemical reactions.
I mean, it is just chemical reactions. Like I said at the beginning of this, DNA can be interpreted as a code, but that does not make it inherently a code. We can determine certain sequences, and we can know the effect of those sequences on the rest of the organism, or on certain biomechanical operations or chemical interactions within an organism. Like, we can determine those things. Just because we can determine sequences in DNA does not mean that it inherently contains code, though.
DNA it's an identical process to computer codes. And it's very interesting that, computer ideas about computers developed early in the 20th century, and, Claude Shannon comes along in 1948.
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
There needs to be no question that communication theory applies to biology. Okay? All of these concepts can be applied to DNA.
Is that debated anywhere?
Only among people who are ignorant, frankly. Okay? People in the know do not debate this fact.
But not in this credible scientific community. This is well understood.
There is no credible scientific argument to try to say that applying communication theory to biology is somehow inappropriate. Yeah. There's hundreds of scientific papers that go very deep into the subject, and so, no, there's...
And again, the only people that have ever mentioned this or ever said this or ever expect this are creationists, just like you.
I'm talking at the moment with Perry Marshall and Kevin Ham. Perry Marshall is from Chicago in the United States, and Kevin Ham is from Vancouver in Canada, and we have just taken part in the United Kingdom launch of a huge prize to be won by anybody who can produce the genetic code or a genetic code via natural process generating it itself. Mm-hmm. Perry, have I got that right, first of all?
That's right. Any code, any encoding, message decoding system that can come out of an emergent property from chemicals to code would qualify.
Yes.
And I think it's one of the most fundamental questions in all of science. And it just hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves.
That's right, it hasn't. And I think that's partly why we've been highlighting it in the meeting that we've just had here at the Royal Society in London. You can't get much more prestigious than that, can you?
No, it's
by the way,
it's delightful.
Yes. Now, question perhaps also to Kevin: does it really need to be 10 million? I'm a scientist. To me, that's a huge sum of money.
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's an acid. I don't understand why you think it's a code. DNA is no more of a code than Diet Coke and regular Coke.
Damn, dude, there's 10 million on the line for this one. I guess you just need to fly over to Oxford, go meet up with the Royal Society, and tell them how they've been completely duped on this entire premise of the genetic code actually being a real code, and that they don't need to be remotely associated with it because it could completely decimate their credibility as academics. In the information age we currently enjoy, to me, it's a completely implausible concept to conclude that HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, WordPress, apps, or any of the other aspects of technology that utilize software, that they could possibly come into existence without programmers and designers being required.
I agree. That would be crazy to assert, but luckily that's not what we're asserting. That's not what anybody's asserting here. It's only you that's claiming that evolution would entail this. So you're basically building a straw man argument against people that already accept evolution and are misrepresenting their arguments for evolution. You see, the biggest difference here is that we have natural explanations for like why DNA looks the way that it does, why it operates the way that it does, and why the diversity of life that we have here on Earth exists. We have natural explanations for why these things happen. We don't have explanation for why like PHP exists, other than somebody designed it. So what you're really doing here is you're comparing bananas to horses here.
Now, while it continues to fascinate me that people such as Godless Engineer continue to make these same assertions, I'm just going to pull up a few papers real quick and scroll through them on how the genetic code, it's a universal enigma from Eugene Koonin. I mean, he's a very high level, actually an atheist, but he admits that there's a code and it's a major conundrum for origin of life. We've got things like dual syntax. I'm pretty sure that syntax is a component of coding and programming. Go figure. Apparently that doesn't exist, but here's evidence that it does. And then here we can really get into some fun stuff where not only is the genetic code have its own programming logic, translational pausing is a subset syntax and code base, which enables a dual control of, from a timing perspective, we're talking about 3D printing logic rules that are executed through the ribosome, through the dual syntax in the genetic code that supposedly isn't a code, even though it houses all sorts of controls, including space and time, which I think is just fascinating. And then you go over into, here's another paper on how computational theory applies to genetics. I mean, you can just go on and on and on with all these different pieces, and you get into information. And here's some interesting stuff about prescriptive information and formal information and how it requires forethought and logic in order for the ciphers and the algorithms to be executed. But according to my opponent, none of this stuff actually exists. There's just no logical, plausible, and probable conclusion you can reach that says binary code will magically transform into syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and all the other if, then, and else logic rules that are required for any type of programming to actually work.
And again, the only people that have ever mentioned this or ever said this or ever expect this are creationists, just like you.
Now, before I go into my formal arguments against neo-Darwinism and modern synthesis, I want you all as the audience to just observe one of the many nanomachine component processes is required for life to exist.
What you are about to see is DNA's most extraordinary secret: how a simple code is turned into flesh and blood. It begins with a bundle of factors assembling at the start of a gene. A gene is simply a length of DNA instructions stretching away to the left. The assembled factors trigger the first phase of the process, reading off the information that will be needed to make the protein. Everything is ready to roll. 3, 2, 1, go. The blue molecule racing along the DNA is reading the gene. It's unzipping the double helix and copying one of the 2 strands. The yellow chain snaking out of the top is a copy of the genetic message, and it's made of a close chemical cousin of DNA called RNA. The building blocks to make the RNA enter through an intake hole. They are matched to the DNA, letter by letter, to copy the A's, C's, T's, and G's of the gene. The only difference is that in the RNA copy, the letter T is replaced with a closely related building block known as U. You are watching this process called transcription in real time. It's happening right now in almost every cell in your body.
Obviously, this debate will go in many directions, but here are 5 positions which challenge the premise of undirected evolution through natural selection being a logical, plausible, or probable reason for our existence. First, adaptation of existing functions to account for environmental condition variance is primarily executed through epigenetic factors which do not result in new core functions. This is a known fact, and the epigenome is a fundamental element which has shaken the entire premise of evolution to its core. Not only are these adaptations the result of variable gene expression caused by epigenetics, they are not the result of mutations. Rather, are controlled modifications executed through read, write, and erase nanomachines. Second, it is my position that macroevolution is not proven by speciation, nor by variance within species. While Darwinists attempt to explain this with very slow changes over time, it is now known that literally thousands of genes and gene regulatory networks working in synchronicity are required for new body plans to exist. Not only must they work in unison, it has been shown extremely minor modifications are fatal in embryo development. While I do not discount that variance can occur on a contained level, it is my strong contingency that these are the result of reorganization and adaptation of existing data and functional capacity, not the creation of new information or function solely through random mutation and natural selection. Third, the variation of transcription factors in gene regulatory networks results in a significant difference in gene expression. To date, the most studied of these are in relation to cognitive function, and show a 9 to 23% of variation between chimps and humans. It has also been shown these differences must work in unison, and any degradation of this, even to the level of point mutation, results in dynamic impairment or death. Not only does this showcase the extreme importance of gene regulation, it also decimates the relevance of similar coding genes in relation to final outcome. Moreover, the significant differences in non-coding regions of the genome become apparent for things ranging from introns, retrotransposons, enhancers, and promoters, to name a few, all of which have been dismissed by those against intelligent design. However, the discoveries made in the past decade have made their relevance unavoidable. Fourth, it has now become apparent through structural biology that not only is the prescriptive information housed in the genetic code required, it must also be geographically coordinated through dynamic real-time folding to enable full gene expression. This applies to interchromosomal data transfer, which not only forces acceptance of physical gene locations being vital, it also decimates the relevance of similar sequences existing in another organism, but being housed in a completely different physical location. Not only does this make sequence similarities irrelevant in relation to undirected natural selection, it actually lends credence to intelligent design. Fifth, the prescriptive information in our genetic code uses arbitrary values, the meaning of which is unknown without a translation mechanism. This semantic meaning is immaterial, and in no other context could it be interpreted without the prior actions of an intelligent agent. It is an unavoidable reality that our genetic code is a 4-dimensional programming codebase unlike anything humans have ever conceived. When all of this is viewed through the now known reality that not only must the information exist, it must also be in a specific physical location in the genome. To conclude that foreknowledge of the desired outcome is not required for life to exist, requires those who dismiss intelligent design to suspend all rational thought. Therefore, its initial creation by undirected physical process, without the action of an intelligent agent, is not only neither logical, plausible, or probable, but impossible. In closing, as you consider these arguments and expansion of them throughout the debate, ask yourself this question. Whose position is more rational? Is it those who conclude it is more logical, plausible, and probable that these things could not occur by chance? Or those who argue, no matter how counterintuitive it is, you must believe this could all happen without a designer being required?
But it is not a code. It's a chemical. It's deoxyribonucleic acid.
Okay, it looks like that concludes it. John, did you have, or John Maddox, did you have anything to say before we officially end?
No, I yield.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for that opening statement. Now, Godless Engineer, the floor is all yours. Take as much time as you need in terms of like an opening or rebuttal, and then when you're cool with it, with moving into a free-flowing dialogue, just let us know. The goal for the discussion for everybody and everybody listening is to keep it an organic civil dialogue. Smokey and I will do our best to stay out of it. But of course, if necessary, if it gets out of hand for any reason at any time, we'll jump in. But yeah, enough from me. The floor is all yours, John.
Okay. So, I mean, honestly, half of that video was not any kind of argument or assertion or anything like that. It seemed more or less like you were trying to insert sort of a, I don't know, I guess a hit job on me and my previous content and responses towards you. And I mean, I'm perfectly fine with that. Like, I don't care. But I mean, you wasted like 7 minutes on just nothing in your opening statement. But in any case, you know, I saw a lot of straw manning of things that I've said in that first little bit of nothing that you presented. Then I would love to know how those things that you listed in your opening statement actually suggest that evolution is not the most plausible explanation for the the diversity of life that we have here on Earth. Like, just given your opening statement, I have come away with it not knowing how adaptation through epigenetics has shaken evolution. You didn't exactly explain that. I also don't understand why gene regulation networks and how minor modifications can just outright kill an organism or is bad somehow, and how that affects evolution. Like, I don't understand that bit. I also don't understand how variable gene expression exactly disproves evolution or suggests that evolution is not the most plausible explanation for the diversity of life. I don't know how physical gene location, how that disproves evolution as the best explanation for the diversity of life, or the idea surrounding genetic code being arbitrary. I don't know how that means that, you know, evolution isn't true or is not the most plausible explanation. So, I mean, really, I've just come away from the opening figuring out that you don't like me so much, it seems, as far as my response to you. And then you give me a whole bunch of information that you'll expound upon later. Because, I mean, I'm totally down with those things disproving evolution, but I really don't think that they have, considering that, you know, evolution is still the leading is required for the diversity of life here. In fact, nothing in your introduction there really seemed to attack evolution, at least as far as I could tell, at least not directly. These things might have indirect, arguments, you know, against evolution, but I really didn't hear much of an argument. Maybe I just wasn't listening well enough or something. I'm not sure. Maybe you can explain that here in a minute. What I do know is that the current scientific consensus is that evolution is the most plausible explanation, but that's not the reason why it's true. The reason why it's true is because of the overwhelming evidence that has been supported experimentally and through observations and just through looking at, like, for instance, fossil evidence and all that kind of good stuff. So I would be interested to hear how John Maddox actually substantiates his claims, how these particular things actually disprove evolution. Maybe he could explain that. But yeah, I guess I'll cede the rest of my opening to get directly into discussion.
Okay, go ahead, since Godless Engineer just ended. John Maddox, if you wanted to start off with a point or a question, it's all yours. The floor is yours, guys.
Well, I mean, I would say, first off, if you don't think I made an argument against evolutionary theory, then I'm guessing you just are ignorant about evolutionary theory. Is that, I mean, do you know anything about it? Because the specific 5 points that I made are in current literature are definitely causing massive upheavals in what the quote unquote consensus is that you're relying upon, given the fact that evolution, slow changes over time, is being absolutely decimated by what we're observing with epigenetics, is for one factor. And then in the context of what is actually...
Can you explain the word decimated for me?
Well, the definition of decimated is usually reduced, destroyed, unsubstantiated, probably another good component of it in terms of the...
Well, no, actually, decimated means that you reduce it by 10%. So, I mean, if the evolutionary theory has been reduced by 10%, then, I mean, is that a meaningful impact to you?
I'm pretty sure there's more than one definition of decimated. Let's see. Kill, destroy, or remove a large percentage or part of. The historic definition is kill 1 in every 10 of a group of soldiers or others as punishment for the whole group. So I'm going to go with the first definition of decimated, and we can play semantics later if you want, specifically in context of how you claimed at my 5th point of the arbitrary value assignment of the genetic code. In the part of the reason I used your own words at the beginning of my opening was to not allow you to try and circumvent and escape the foundational premise, which you tried to completely dismiss, and you came after me originally, and you're obviously trying to dismiss now in this context, and that's why I put it in multiple locations, is the arbitrary value assignment, per your own words when it comes to coding, would require an intelligent agent. I proved beyond doubt that that information is there, and it is a requirement for life, and per your own admission on video, you said if that was true, then a designer would be required. So
define what you mean by information in this particular context.
Well, in this context, prescriptive information, which is the ordered instructions with a outcome that must be followed in order to receive that, or in order for that end objective to be achieved. I mean, prescriptive information is a pretty well-defined premise in information theory, as well as formal information. And if you're going to try and go down it's just information but doesn't have any meaning, then do we really need to go down like semantics, pragmatics, syntax?
Well, no, I mean, I've heard you say that like DNA has if, and other kind of logic gates. I'm wondering, can you explain to me exactly what you mean by DNA having those things?
Okay, so first off, is it your assertion that there are no logic gates in DNA?
I'm not making any kind of assertion. I'm asking a question.
Well, you made that assertion in the video. So I'm asking you, before I respond, is it your assertion that that does not exist?
I'm not making an assertion. I'm asking you a question. And I'm
asking you what your current position is.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, I asked the question first, so how about you just oblige me, and then maybe I can oblige you.
Yes, regulatory components in genetics are recognized as logic gates, and they are recognized as actually Boolean logic gates, and they have if-then logic built in, and they actually are more complex and have higher degrees of variability and complexity than what we use as logic gates in our current computational technologies.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure what your profession is, like outside of like your YouTube channel and stuff, but it seems to me that you just don't seem to really understand like logic gates as far as like coding and coding standards really go. Because I'm wondering, can you actually distinguish these if-then gates from just cause and effect?
You just said I don't understand them, so debunk what I just said. Because if you want to continue down this rabbit hole, I will happily pull up
Well, I mean, you're just baselessly asserting that these if-then logic gates exist. You're not actually giving me any kind of evidence that they do exist in DNA code.
So are you going to make me pull up a paper and like prove it to you?
What?
You going to make me pull up a paper and prove it to you right now?
I mean, what I'm asking you to do is to distinguish cause and effect from the if-then nature of like gene expressions in DNA.
Okay, so if this temporal variable, i.e. the timeline of embryo development, is in play, then have this regulatory component execute this, express this gene in this manner. When this variable is no longer in play, then move said control variable to a different section of the genome, reinsert through retrotranscriptase, and now have an entirely different outcome be executed through that regulatory component.
Okay,
that's the literal of if-then.
Well, no, but what I actually asked you to do was differentiate cause and effect from if-then.
If-then literally is a cause and effect. And
well, that's precisely
hang on. And it requires, if-thens require foreknowledge of the intended outcome, correct?
I do. Well, no.
You just questioned. No, hang on. You questioned. No, you insulted me, and you questioned my knowledge of coding. My knowledge of coding. Hang on. You questioned my knowledge of coding. So, if you're writing what is your background? You say you're an engineer. What is your background with coding?
If you're not going to allow me to answer a question, I'm not going to answer further questions. You understand me, John? This is an adult conversation.
Yeah, and you're dropping insults, so you can't back up. So go ahead. What's your background?
Insults? When have I insulted?
You insulted my knowledge of coding.
Well, that's not exactly dropping like personal insults against you, which I think is.
Well, given the fact I owned a software development company and worked in multiple tech startups, yeah, I think I know a little something about this. So, what is your background, sir?
I didn't know that. That's why I said I don't know what your background is.
So what is your knowledge when you're questioning mine?
Okay, guys, I'm going to jump in real quick. If we wanted to maybe go back to, I'm not sure if Godless had a question he wanted to ask, then we can give John Maddox plenty of time to respond and then go back to what I guess we'll try and do the minimal amount of interrupting as we can. So I guess, Godless, if you had a question, then we can allow John Maddox to answer it. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, all I asked him to do was differentiate it from cause and effect. And he says that if-then is literally a cause and effect. And then he asked me if it requires foreknowledge, and I was trying to answer that question. And I don't think in this particular context it requires foreknowledge. In actual programmatic coding of like computers and other things, it does require foreknowledge of it. But I don't think in the context of DNA code, it does require foreknowledge, because at the heart of it, they're chemical reactions. And these chemical reactions happen regardless of what happens after it. So in evolutionary theory, what it actually says in evolutionary theory is that these chemical reactions occur, and through a long process of, you could say, trial and error and just things chemically reacting with other things, that it eventually led down a path to where they operate like this. That's what evolutionary theory actually says. So it has a naturalistic explanation that is perfectly reasonable and in line with how we think about other natural things that occur in our reality. So I'm just kind of curious what to him screams supernatural in this whole idea that there are if-then gates in DNA code, when it seems to me like these if-then gates are really just cause and effect of chemical reactions. And over long periods of time, these chemical reactions have resulted in processes that have existed for a long time.
Okay, go ahead, LPP. Take as much time as you need now.
I'm not really sure what kind of a question that was. I guess the complete and utter fascinating ignorance of the talking point just spewed by my opponent is that it is a well-established premise that deterministic chemistry, and I'm paraphrasing a quote here, deterministic chemistry no longer accounts for what we are discovering in biology. And I mean, I can literally pull up the paper and show you the quote if you want, or you can read the entire paper.
Well, I mean, I don't have to read the paper.
It's my turn to respond, right?
Tell me how.
I literally explained one of them to you, which obviously went over your head. But let's go with the second one. So we have, you claim it is nothing but cascade chemical reactions. Well, what we're discovering with structural biology is that things are happening in literally different spatiotemporal regions that are happening simultaneously to another one that are then used in conjunction, but there was no initial cause and effect of the process to occur. So when you look at that way, you have, from a reality perspective, you have two separate functions being executed simultaneously, but then conjoined to have a alternative outcome. And this is reduced to such a simplistic, well, it's not simplistic, but such a fundamental component of life, which is the ribosome and the translation of mRNA into a polypeptide, that there is no chemical reaction between the codon and the amino acid. It is literally being read. This is a recognized premise in biology, in cellular biology, information theory, that there is literally a read of data being executed by the ribosome. There is no chemical reaction. So to argue that is nothing but cause and effect, chemistry is absolutely eviscerated at the fundamental of the creation of a protein. There is no chemical reaction between them.
So maybe you can explain to me what it means for it to read the RNA.
It is registering that it is the correct amino acid which matches to the codon. But and the reason that we know that it's being read beyond doubt is that even if there is a incorrect or a correct codon anticodon match, but the incorrect amino acid is being transferred by that tRNA, the ribosome then ejects that amino acid because it's not the correct one. And this is also a registered premise in all the things that are happening with DNA computation systems that are being built right now. And we've reprogrammed ribosomes to read syntax that's been devised by humans. So, like, this is not a questioned premise in genetics and biology. It's only questioned by atheists who are desperate to avoid it.
No, I reject that notion entirely. I don't understand. Hold on, I don't understand how you're not seeing that it is in fact a chemical reactions when one chemical reacts with some organelle, and in that reaction it generates another chemical. Like, this sounds like a chemical reaction. So, I mean, how exactly is it not? How do you, I guess let's get down to it. Like, what do you define as a chemical reaction exactly?
Dude, did you listen to a word that I said, or did it just fly over your head? There is no chemical reaction between the codon of the mRNA and the amino acid. There is no chemical reaction. This is a well-recognized premise. And if you want,
I guess I just simply don't recognize that particular premise, because you literally have chemicals interacting with organelles, and those organelles are interacting with those things.
Do you know anything about
these chemical interactions?
Do you know anything about protein synthesis?
I mean, I don't think that we have to get into like protein synthesis and everything.
Well, if you're going to argue
denying
reactions,
chemical reactions happening.
Explain this, and I'm literally telling you that it is a recognized fact that there is no chemical reaction in the reading process of the data set, which is represented by the codon in an mRNA, and the amino acid that is now being inserted into the polypeptide sequence, which turned into a protein. This is a recognized premise. It's a question. It's a gigantic question in origin of life research of, we do have arbitrary data values that we have to account for. What the heck do you think is one of the fundamental things they're doing in origin of life research? There's papers that are being published this year trying to come up with theories of how they can explain this arbitrary value assignment to the genetic code. Like, there's papers out the yin yang on this, and you're claiming that's false.
No, that's not anything that I said. It would behoove you not to strawman me or to put words in my mouth. I'm just saying that's not how adult conversations work. Okay, so I don't understand, regardless of whether or not I'm right or wrong about chemical reactions and reading RNA. Regardless of that, how does this exactly apply to evolution and whether or not it's natural?
Okay, so going back to one of the fundamental points of all this is if a programming code base is required for functions and processes and capacity that is required for biological systems to exist, requires arbitrary data value assignment and prescriptive knowledge and formal information structure in order for the simplest elements of life to exist. How do you explain that occurring through undirected process? Because if you're going to go down that rabbit hole and say it can happen through undirected process, then let's go back to your assertion that no, PHP couldn't exist without a designer. So how could a computer code come into existence? How could binary come into existence without an intelligent agent to assign the values to each side of the data set?
Well, as far as binary goes, I don't think that you could get that naturally. If there is some natural reason why those things would exist, then they would be natural. But I also don't think that binary code is directly correlates to genetic code.
Okay, so you do realize that MIT, Cambridge, and several universities in India, I believe, have actually literally written their own programming languages that translate from binary directly into genetic programming, right? And
regardless, hold on. If you're going to mention something, you got to let me respond to it, there, John. You can't just disconnect me.
I'm going to directly respond to your first part of your question, now. You said specifically that you did not see how binary could be corollary to genetic code. Okay, so are you now, number one, are you admitting that there is a code?
DNA can be interpreted as a code.
Is it literal or figurative?
It is my belief that DNA can be interpreted as a code.
So not a literal one.
But it's ultimately a chemical that goes through different chemical reactions, different processes.
So were you paying attention at all during my opening?
I mean, yes, I've been paying attention to you.
Okay, so are you suggesting that you should fly over to the Royal Society and tell them that's not a literal code?
I would still appreciate you not doing questions like that, because obviously that's not what I'm suggesting. Obviously, I'm not an expert.
It's exactly what you're suggesting.
And you're not an expert in this field, John.
That's exactly what you're suggesting,
my point is, though, that the context in which we were talking about code is different for binary as it is when we're talking about DNA code. Those are things that don't necessarily correlate.
Okay, let me address
because we have natural I'm still talking. We have natural explanations for how the DNA code evolved.
No, we
have explanations for that. What we don't have a natural explanation for is how binary code could have come about without humans inventing it, knowing to interpret low voltage values as 0 and high voltage values as 1, and then arranging them in specific orders in order to communicate meaningful messages. What we do have for DNA, though, is chemical processes that occur, and over long periods of time, those chemical processes result in different configurations of life that either die out and are no more because they're not they're not keen on surviving in whatever environment. And then you have these other processes that arise, these other chemical reactions that happen that do allow the organisms to survive, and they keep procreating. They keep changing their information through reproduction and different mutations, and it just keeps evolving into these new processes. So I hope that you can kind of see now how I'm separating out the two different contexts in which these codes have arisen.
Okay,
one was definitely man-made, and the other one was definitely natural.
Okay, so
Okay, real quick. Actually, John, you're going to get plenty of time to respond. Actually, I'm going to give you equal time to respond. If at any point in the future you guys want to move to I have no problem doing 90-second strict timed rebuttals. If you feel like it's getting a little interruptive, right now is good. But if any of you feel like that at some point, let me know and we can do that. If you guys feel comfortable as the way it is right now, we can continue that as well. So just let me know at any time. And John Maddox, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'm just going to be very direct and say that Godless, I don't know how you put engineer at the second part of your name, because if you, number one, your level of ignorance on this topic is so mind-bending. I do not know how you actually think you're making a remotely coherent separation of these things. Okay, so first off, how is binary and genetic code corollary? Okay, so A in binary equals 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. In genetic code, AUG equals start. I mean, there's syntax for what this codon, this triplet of base pairs equals, does not transform into, is equal to this amino acid. I mean, this is such basic logic. I really don't understand how you're trying to argue this is separate. Number two, as I've already stated before you made this assertion, your claim that we just already know that the genetic code evolved naturally, did you not listen to a word that I have said? Because I have addressed this multiple times and stated clearly that we don't know how it evolved. What the heck do you think the $10 million is on the line for? Right now, as we speak, that video I showed from the Royal Society, that was from June of last year. That money has not been won. There are paper after paper. I read several of them this past 2 weeks on the latest quote unquote quasi theories of how it could possibly have come into existence. They do crazy crap like, oh, well, if only 50% of it had to come into existence at one time, then maybe at some point, if the wobble effect kicked in at the very end, the last stage, then we could have a code. It's like, get out of town. So some of the most vital components of this code, they don't have to exist right away, even though our logic doesn't apply unless we have it at the front end. I mean, is it not computing the direct correlate between binary and genetics? Because there's papers I can pull up right now on how they've done studies comparing the genetic code to a literal million other possible code bases and found that it's the most optimal. So was that all hypothetical, or were they actually doing direct comparison to a code base and its redundancy, its robustness, and its ability to store data?
I mean, evolutionary theory would suggest that the reason why it's the most optimal is because of the fact that it's had millions of years in order to work out certain kinks that, so some of the processes that would have resulted would not have been the most optimal path. So it seems to me like evolution, naturalistic evolution, has just as good of an explanation as your God did it explanation, if not more, if not better, a better explanation for it. So, I mean, I can't remember everything that you said in that Gish Gallop of, I do remember you questioning whether or not I'm an engineer, how I can put an engineer after my name, which, I mean, I'm not even going to dignify because that's just an ad hominem low blow attack. And it's honestly sad, seeing that come from you. Not surprising.
I told you what I did. What did you do? You dismissed my arguments, so back up your claims.
Which claims in particular?
How does arbitrary data values get assigned to a recognized code base through random undirected process? As an engineer, explain to me how that's remotely plausible.
Well, I mean, chemical reactions in a natural environment. I mean, and I've already explained this to you.
Chemical reactions that do not have.
Hold on, John. Did I finish talking? Did I finish talking, John? I let you crap up for a long time. Please jump in.
Yeah, let's let Godless finish his thoughts uninterrupted, and then John, you can get equal time. We'll make sure both of you always get equal time, so no reason to interrupt. So go ahead, Godless.
as I said, I've already explained this in this debate that natural processes, natural chemical reactions would have resulted in the configuration that would have been most likely to survive, because it did survive. And so over millions of years and over a lot of trial and error of these different processes evolving different ways, we've eventually come to this quote unquote arbitrary value system for the genetic code. And regardless of whether or not it's arbitrary, you have to admit that the natural chemical processes don't require any kind of supernatural interaction for them to happen.
Okay, so obviously you have never researched abiogenesis, because as of right now, the greatest number of base paired nucleotides they've managed to get to hook together without enzymes is 21. So, and that's in a non-prebiotic environment. They've gotten 21 to bind together. So your entire premise of somehow a syntax that has semantics and pragmatics being able to just over millions of years somehow form itself is not remotely backed up by the quote unquote natural chemical reactions to which you are referring to. On the protein side that's needed for transcription and translation in all observed life, even the simplest forms, all require this. The max they've gotten to bond together without other enzymes is 14 amino acids. They've gotten to do it, bind together without the other appropriate directors. So
I don't understand how this is prescriptive to the natural world.
You don't understand that?
I don't understand why what we've been able to accomplish in the lab setting directly correlates to what is possible or plausible in the natural world.
Okay.
In this particular context only.
Okay. So in order for the fundamentals of your argument, which is, just over millions of years, natural chemical processes resulted in the development of this syntax. It's not really arbitrary, but hey, it's somehow here. Requires the ability for the replication mechanism and an open-ended Darwinian evolution model to be feasible. The point that is being made is that even in a controlled environment, which has exponentially reduced obstructions to the processes that you're referring to actually being executed, they can't do it. On purpose, they can't do it. So you're claiming that through undirected natural process, things that we can't do on purpose somehow happened by accident. Is that your claim?
No, that is not something that I ever said.
You're claiming.
Thank you for inserting more words into my mouth.
Okay, let me dumb it down for you then. Are you suggesting that something that is not feasible in a lab is more likely to occur in a uncontrolled, violent environment?
I think that the lab can be used to describe what happens in reality, but it is not prescriptive as to what can happen in the natural world. So that is what I said. And okay. I don't feel like you've actually been arguing against what I've actually said at any point during this debate.
Okay, so as an engineer, would you argue that if you were given all these different pieces of steel and the angles and such, but you didn't have the bolts, would you ever conclude that without the bolts and without the tools needed to insert them and tighten the nuts, that all these pieces of steel would somehow bind themselves together?
No, I don't understand the point of this question.
Okay, the chemical processes and the binding that's required in order for these functions of baseline biology to exist are the equivalent of the insertion of nuts and bolts to bind the two things together into the appropriate structure. So the question I'm asking you is, if you had a whole bunch of pieces of steel and the angles to connect them, but you had no bolts and no nuts, would you ever conclude that without them and without the intelligent agent that created them, that those pieces of steel would ever connect themselves?
Well, sticking with your really poorly formed analogy here, if there was a natural process that could explain why nuts and bolts would first form in the first place and then find their way to these supposed angles created by these steel beams, then I would definitely agree that these nuts and bolts would naturally form and then naturally find their way into these particular points. But see, the problem with your analogy is that these particular nuts, bolts, and beams are all man-made things, whereas what we know of as far as DNA goes is natural. So that is the major difference between those two things. One is definitely man-made. The other one has a foundation in the natural world where things arise naturally because of natural processes.
Do all things ultimately have the fundamentals of physics and chemistry and elements and molecules?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Are all things, whether man-made or otherwise, are they all ultimately comprised of chemical bonds?
Well, I mean, I would agree with that statement, but I don't understand where you're going.
So in the context of what we do with synthetic chemistry, when we cause things to happen that wouldn't normally happen, they are possible to happen, but are not normal to happen. When we force those things to occur, are you claiming that that's just natural occurrence, or is that controlled leveraging of physics and chemistry based on a foreseen objective?
Well, obviously, if they're synthetic, as in not appearing in the natural world, then yes, we are the ones that are controlling processes in the natural world to cause things to happen. But I don't see any correlation to DNA as far as having some intelligence that's needed in order for DNA to exist.
Okay, so
also, I didn't know that this was a DNA debate. I thought that this was a debate on evolution.
Well, I mean, we're talking about the fundamentals of it.
I understand the role that DNA plays in evolution because I do understand evolution despite your ad hominem attacks against me. But my point is that this is a debate on whether or not God is needed to exist for DNA to occur, not for evolution to occur.
Well, it's literally called chemical evolution.
Evolution is still a true thing that happens in reality. There are theistic evolutionists everywhere. So I guess I don't understand how any of this that we have actually discussed here has directly correlated to evolution, other than tangentially through the fact that DNA is the one of the prime mediums for mutation and evolution.
So it's the fundamental component for modern synthesis and evolutionary theory by definition. And per the evolutionary arguments, without mutations and modifications to the data in the DNA, none of the other evolutionary supposed outcomes could occur per the evolutionary model. So I'm not really sure how you can claim that what we're discussing does not have direct relevance to evolution. We're actually going directly to the core of evolution, not being distracted by the fluffy crap that people such as yourself love to focus on without actually addressing the root cause.
Well, can I explain?
I'm letting you talk now.
Oh, are you sure? Never mind. Sorry about that. So the way that this doesn't exactly correlate to the discussion of evolution is that God could totally exist. God could have created DNA. God, I mean, I will, for the sake of the argument that we're having right now, that could totally plausibly be a thing. But that goes nowhere to address evolution, because evolution, after DNA was, in this case, in this context, created, after that point, evolution definitely occurred. So these two situations are delineated by that fact.
That's a false assumption.
How is that a false assumption?
Well, the core of your assumption is that the initial data set can come into existence by itself, number one. Number two, the whole premise of evolution is that somehow the entirely new functions are able to spring into existence through undirected process. And we actually don't observe new data set functions coming into existence.
We do. Well, there are several studies.
No. What they have observed is modifications to existing data. And that is where one of the root components that I talked about in relation to epigenetics came into play. Many of the things that used to be considered new data sets they're now discovering it's the result of methylation and other epigenetic factors that literally alter the expression of the existing data. We also have direct observations of things that were initially construed as new functions, actually being the degradation from an existing function. So just because you have downgraded does not mean that you didn't have to have the capacity initially. I mean, this is extraordinarily basic logic. And this is what they're discovering out the yin-yang the more and more we learn about genetics, is that, oh, wait a minute, we thought this was a quote unquote mutation. What we actually have discovered is there was either a breakage or a modification. And now this existing function is now being hyperexpressed, which is resulting in this phenotypic outcome. This isn't something new. It's just the acceleration of something that was existing. So you're now looking at existing data being construed as supposed evolution versus it having to already have been there. I mean, are you comprehending what I'm saying here?
Yes, John, I comprehend what you're saying.
Explain it to me then.
What you're failing to understand is how epigenetics plays into evolution, because evolution is the only way to really understand why epigenetics happens. I don't. Can you explain to me a bit further?
No. You have to expand. You have to expand on that. You have to expand on that assertion.
Oh, real quick. Let's just let Godless finish.
No, he needs to expand on that assertion.
Well, I mean, first, what I need to hear from you is how epigenetics destroys evolution or has shaken it up. You seem to make baseless claims about how it's, rocking the evolutionary world as far as, the foundation for evolutionary theory. As far as how epigenetics plays into evolution and why evolution is necessary, for epigenetics to even be understood. I mean, I guess I don't understand how supernatural intervention as far as God creating things really explains anything about epigenetics, while on the evolutionary theory side, we can explain why, epigenetics happens, why things are expressed more when these tags or these epigenetic markers are put in there. Like, for instance, epigenetic markers come into significant effect when women get pregnant. There are genes that are expressed a lot more during pregnancy and stuff like that. So, I mean, this is perfectly understood under evolution. You seem to be under the guise of thinking that evolution can't explain those things naturally, but when in fact we can. It's been heavily studied, and I still don't see the necessary the need for supernatural intervention versus just natural processes.
Okay, so obviously you got a live chat from somebody that you were reading that was trying to BS your way through this one. The epigenetics, it is your claim that epigenetics are just fully understood and a component of evolutionary theory and is not causing any kind of negative damage to the dogma. Is that your position?
Well, as far as exactly what you said, none of that makes sense because there's no dogma. Second of all, I am not aware of every single article that's out there concerning evolution or anything like that. But as far as I know,
it's fully explained by
consensus of evolution has not been upended by bukus of information that you claim to exist.
Okay,
I have not heard
literally, dude, you obviously don't actually research any of this stuff. It's fascinating to me that you have this many people that follow you and your level of knowledge is so low, and you're sitting there spewing these talking points that are so debunked. It's mind-bending. But in the direct context, you're claiming this is all understood. Okay, fine. Well, what the heck is the purpose of the third wave conferences that are going on around the world, headed up by the chairman of the Royal Society, that are specifically going against the central dogma, which is the term of modern synthesis and extended modern synthesis, to try and account for epigenetics? Because so many of the things, such as Darwin's finches and their little beak-sized modifications that were used for 100 years as supposed evidence for evolution, they've discovered that, oh, wait, that, like so many other things, are just the result of epigenetic modification that literally goes away when the external variable is no longer in place. It is not a modification to the source data from a heredity perspective that goes into the macro phenotype. It's a pre-existing capacity. So if you're claiming that all of the possibilities that are needed for evolution are pre-existing, pre-programmed capacities, then I guess we're in agreement. If you are claiming that those pre-existing, pre-programmed capacities somehow came into existence post-demand for the function, then we don't agree. So which side do you take?
I'm not taking either side of the dichotomy that you presented. I'm not an expert in this field, but also nothing that you said about whatever kind of conference that you're talking about, none of that remotely sounded like it was challenging evolution. So I don't understand the purpose of even presenting that. True, we're still trying to understand epigenetics on the whole, but evolution can still provide a sufficient enough explanation for epigenetics and explain processes concerning epigenetics. It only strengthens the evolutionary theory more. And I'm not exactly sure where you're getting this information from. So, I mean, if you could provide citations for any of this, I would be grateful to be able to read those things.
There's a link on my channel.
Just coming from creationist propaganda.
No, actually, bro, because for people like you that try to make that assertion, I literally have a Google Drive folder that's publicly accessible. You can go on my channel. It says for the annoying people, and literally every paper in there is secular. So go and read those papers, and that actually back up my assertion from atheists, most of them, who are trying to come up with explanations for it.
Actually, I've personally talked to. I'm sorry, moderator. I'm talking with John Maddox here. So I've talked with Gutsick Gibbon about your thing, about your Google Drive there, John, who she has read through about half of all the papers. Mm-hmm. They don't actually support your conclusion.
Actually, they do, and I'm going to have a debate with her after you.
Oh, okay, good.
I was waiting for this. I was waiting for this one to debate her. So
well, then why did you ghost me that one time?
I've been busy, bro.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to jump in real quick. I think what Praise was trying to do, because Godless, if you felt like it wasn't really going too much in the direction of evolution, if you wanted to, if you felt like it was appropriate, you could give which you thought was some of the better evidence for your position, and have John Maddox address it. You don't have to, but I think that's what Praise meant by that. Am I right, Praise? Yeah. I thought you weren't jumping in or anything, but that's totally up to you guys. If you wanted to take another direction, just to feel like you're able to get your points across, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I would say that one of the best pieces of evidence for evolution is the vast fossil evidence that directly shows modification of organisms through long periods of time. Another really good piece of evidence for evolution is whale evolution. how we know whales to have evolved from land quadrupeds once they transitioned from the land, the environment, which includes being on land, to a more of a sea environment. That particular transition is overwhelmingly proof of evolution, and all of this is besides all of the chemical evidence for mutations and all of that being the driving force of evolution, along with sexual selection and other mechanisms of that sort. So, I mean, I've given you a few things that actually prove my point on evolution being the most plausible and possible explanation for the diversity of life.
Okay, so do you even know what incomplete lineage sorting is?
I don't see how that applies to what
you just said chemical evidence for mutations as evidence for evolution, which is phylogenetics. So I'm asking you, do you know what the assumption is when it comes to incomplete lineage sorting?
Well, I mean, I know that while we don't have every single skeletal structure that
I'm talking about from a DNA perspective.
Oh, from a DNA perspective.
This is genetic.
Okay, I'm sorry. I listed 4 or 5 things that definitely prove evolution happened. So
you said record of chemical evolution or chemical mutations for evolution. That was what you said.
The mutations that occur in DNA are proof of how evolution works.
Okay, so the point I'm making is the assertion that is made that supposedly that is proof. Okay, so the Blossom 62 matrix, for example, that's used in phylogenetics, literally only requires a 30 to 40% match in the gene sequence that's supposedly evidence for the heredity lineage. So are you suggesting that if all I have to do to say, yes, 100%, this is where it came from, is match 30%? And I'm going to say, woo, that's where it came from. What? Okay, so we know beyond doubt that if you had that many modifications in the base pairs of that gene sequence, there's not a prayer that thing would function. So you're claiming that we can make that argument when you don't have actually a remote comparison of what would actually function?
I guess I don't. I don't understand how this applies.
I'll get to the chase. So incomplete lineage sorting is that, hey, here's this phylogeny tree of here's what came from what. Here's everything that's related. What they don't tell you is that incomplete lineage sorting literally says, hey, we don't have anything in this gigantic gap. We're just going to assume and assert that it came from this. We have no data. We have no proof. We're going to assert that this is what happened. And these massive jumps are what happened from here to here. And we're going to claim, that's why I made the point about gene regulatory networks and body plans. Okay, cool, bro. You have to we recognize there's 1,000 differences, 1,000 different genes in between this organism and this organism. So we're now talking about literally millions of base pair differences, any one of which can result in death. And you're going to claim that somehow millions of modifications just slowly over time came into existence without the termination effect of mutations that we observe in every form of life. When you have, for example, in the Titan protein, you get single point mutations, and there are all sorts of different fatal diseases that come out from that, from a single point mutation. So you're claiming that somehow millions of changes happened to get to build the 33,884, I think it is, amino acid long amino acid chain. That sequence just somehow popped into existence without error.
What is your evidence that natural processes can't explain those things?
The fact that we in the lab on purpose without pre-existing enzymes can't even bond more than 21 base pairs. The Titan protein requires over 300,000 base pairs in the correct sequence in order to be transcribed into a Titan protein, any error in which causes fatality. So are you asserting that it's reasonable to conclude when in the lab on purpose, knowing exactly what we're trying to build, we can't get more than 21 to bond, but we need 300,000 for one of the most fundamental proteins, which per the evolutionary timeline is asserted to have come into existence in unicellular organisms before muscles even existed?
I mean, I know that I covered this earlier. I don't know why you think that what happens in the lab is prescriptive as to what can or is plausible or possible to happen in the natural world. So I feel like that's the disconnect that you're feeling there. Also, if I could request whoever's the mod that is actually streaming, whenever you click off of the tab that has us in the Streamlabs call, all of our faces go blank on the front-facing thing. I don't know if it's messing anybody else up, but it's definitely messing me up as I have it pulled up on the other side of me over here with the chat closed, by the way. But I still don't understand why you think that what happens in the lab is prescriptive of what can or should or is possible or plausible to happen in the natural world.
Okay. Really don't know how to break this down anymore. If you have a piece of iron, is it remotely plausible that without a grindstone, that piece of iron is going to turn into a sword? And without a fire?
This has no bearing
It does.
on
Answer the
what we're
question.
talking about.
It does. Answer the question.
No, it doesn't have any bearing on it because obviously if you have a piece of iron and a grindstone, it's not going to automatically grind itself. It requires the human element in order to do that. But what I'm suggesting is that evolution is a natural process, just like all the other natural processes out there that happen without the intervention of humans. It happened naturally. And so you cannot compare a obviously man-made interaction with an obviously natural interaction that doesn't require any kind of human interference.
So is code bases, are code bases naturally occurring in any other context?
I mean, I don't know.
Okay. I literally, I'll put a dare on you. Would you have the CO Jones to go out on camera and literally tell people that PHP invented itself?
No, I wouldn't. But
Okay.
here, let me give you. Hold on. Let me. You asked me a question. Let me actually finish answering. Okay, John. All right. So let me give you a good example of how this of a code that arises naturally. Right. Take bumblebees for example. Bumblebees know which flowers to go to, and that's because once we've examined flowers under certain spectrums of light, we see that they have certain designs, and these designs on these flowers compel the bees to go there in order to get nectar so that they can feed their hive. Well, these bees also transfer pollen to other flowers, which then allow them to propagate their species. So there is a symbiotic relationship there between the bees and the flowers, so that the flowers that compel the bees to come and get their nectar and thus pollinate the other flowers around there, which then generate other flowers, is a driving force of the evolution of that particular lineage of flowers. So if you want to interpret that as being a code that the plant has generated naturally on its own through trial and error, which does mean that some plants just won't end up surviving or propagating the species, that is a natural code that we can interpret that is transmitted to the bees that then pollinate that particular flower as well as other flowers. So I guess when you ask me, can codes, as far as we understand them, be generated naturally? Obviously, they can.
Okay, so you're trying to resort to evolutionary signal theory, and which is quite honestly one of the stupidest arguments that evolutionists and atheists try to make, because it requires a completed pre-existing system. Like, do you not comprehend this? Are you suggesting that the
what?
Hey, let me finish. Prior to the bee flying and reading the pollen and the signal being put off by this flower, did the code base, which enables them to have the sensor cells, or the receptor cells that are able to read the information that's being broadcast by the plant, did the data and the logic rules and the syntax, semantics, and pragmatics that is executed to result in the functional capacity in order to interpret it, did that have to exist prior to or post the broadcast of the signal?
So this is still not any kind of evidence against evolution, because even if God is required to do those things, which I'm not saying that God is, even if God was required to do those things, evolution could have still happened.
Okay, so are you suggesting
actually attacked the question of?
I'm literally addressing the question. I'm literally addressing the question.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am. I am suggesting that I'm questioning to you. You're claiming that the signal and the code base theory, the code bases can be built through the interpretation of them prior to the existence of the capacity to interpret them. That is literally the assertion that is made in evolutionary signal theory. Like, this is a fact beyond all doubt. Like, are you suggesting that without the DNA code and the transcription capacity and protein synthesis, are you suggesting that the receptor cells in the bee that the bee uses to read and interpret the signals being sent off by the plant, are you suggesting without the genetic code existing prior to, in order to create that receptor cell, are you saying the receptor cell can exist?
No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying,
I just destroyed evolutionary theory.
Hold on. Come on, John. We both know how adult conversations work. What I'm saying here is that all of that could be true, that God was necessary for DNA to be in existence, that God is necessary for this signal to have existed. All of that is in this context. What I'm putting forth here is that let's just assume that all of that is real, right? Evolution would have still happened.
No.
Why?
Because you're having to assert that somehow things like, okay, so you do realize that like photosynthesis has literal quantum coherence requirements in order for it to occur, right? So you're, per the evolutionary timeline, somehow one of the very first things that popped into existence is the ability to on demand control quantum state. You actually think that that's a simple process that just came into existence? Do you actually think that? And it wasn't pre-written in terms of the data requirement?
So in order for that question to even make sense, it would require me to put forth the assertion that plants are the first thing that immediately developed. That is not at all what I think, nor what I've communicated in any video or what I've ever said anywhere.
Well, it's one of the things asserted by evolutionary theory is that photosynthesis is one of the first things that enabled life to evolve. So, per the evolutionary timeline.
I sincerely doubt that assertion that is the first thing that came about.
I think one of the first things, and the very, very early in the evolutionary timeline, is that photosynthesis somehow came into existence, and the ability to control the quantum state requirement to capture the energy of photons is something that was supposedly one of the first elements in the evolutionary timeline. So I'm just asking you directly, if that is the case, do you think it is remotely plausible that something that is dependent on things going from extraordinarily simple to complex, one of the most complex possible things you can imagine, somehow came into existence very early in the timeline?
I'll say this for the umpteenth time, John. Even if God was required to create photosynthesis in cells, that still does not mean that evolution didn't happen, and we definitely have proof that evolution happened.
Okay, so are you suggesting that de novo genes, we have any explanation for where they come from?
I did not mention de novo genes. I don't see how de novo genes are really factored into the discussion on whether or not God exists, which seems to be the conversation.
No, we're going up against, is it more logical and plausible to conclude that an intelligent agent was required, or naturalistic evolution, which is your position? I am questioning naturalistic evolution on a variety of fronts because it does not seem remotely logical, plausible, or probable that the things that are required and fundamental to any form of life, whether simple or complex, they have technology requirements that are so monumental that it does not seem remotely plausible they could come into existence without an intelligent agent. I mean, direct question, do you think the quantum computers that are currently being developed by Google, GE, Microsoft, etc., do you think it's remotely plausible that the quantum coherent state that's required for them could possibly exist without intelligent agents?
This debate is over evolution, not whether or not God exists or some ambiguous intelligence exists.
Do you think quantum computers could evolve?
I'm not going to answer that particular question, not because I'm not able to answer it, but because that's not actually the question that we're asking in this debate. What we're actually debating in this debate is whether or not evolution happened versus intelligent design, which I have yet to hear you give a coherent argument against evolution even happening. I have heard you put forth many standard arguments as far as scientific arguments go against the idea that a God doesn't exist. I've heard plenty of those, but I've yet to hear any kind of coherent argument against evolution in general. Because as I've said before, and I've diffused this several times in this debate, but you seem to not be listening, even if God existed and created all of the foundations of life that we have now, all of the evidence points to evolution actually happening. So you have not evolution couldn't have happened.
Obviously, you have not comprehended a word that's come out of my mouth this entire night.
Obviously,
are you arguing that we have observed the formation of new gene function in de novo genes? Are you arguing that we have ever observed this to occur?
No, I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing the fact that none of this is actually pertinent to the question of
it's
evolution.
100% pertinent, because literally de novo genes are a fundamental requirement for evolution to be true, that somehow they can spontaneously come into existence through slow mutation and selective pressure, environmental pressure, and natural selection, that somehow these things can come into existence. We are talking about fundamental genes that are recognized as key separators between different types of organisms. Like without this and this, they would not have the differentiation factors that we're looking at from a quote unquote evolutionary perspective. So if that is the case, then from an evolutionary defense mechanism perspective, you must explain how it is remotely plausible and explainable that a 2,000 amino acid protein that has a 6,000 base pairs that must be an appropriate sequence of code somehow have created themselves. Do you think that a function in a software program that is 6,000 lines of code long, do you think it is remotely plausible that thing could just pop into existence?
The coding question that you're talking about doesn't apply to this particular.
It literally applies.
No, it does not literally apply to this conversation. And to what you're saying here is that do new mutations occur? Yes.
No. I said do completely new data set functions come into existence purely through mutation.
I mean, you can go to talkorigins and you can look at these exact questions and you can find the actual papers that prove that new mutations do occur, new functions do occur, and are known to actually present themselves. And so, I mean, everything that you have said here tonight has not actually disproven evolution. I'm still talking.
Hang on,
John, I'm still talking.
Okay, let's do this. Let's do this, guys. Maybe this is a good time to wrap up. Why don't we give you each? I'm not going to give a time limit on it. However much time you guys both feel, uninterrupted, to wrap up your points, sum up everything regarding the discussion portion, and then we'll move on to a Q&A. Who would like to start? You can, as much time as you need, uninterrupted.
I'll let Maddox go first.
Okay, go ahead, Maddox.
Well, my opponent obviously didn't listen to a word that I said the entire night. He has nothing but standard talking points that he is on complete repeat for. And things such as he's talking about, oh, we've seen new genes and new functions come to existence. Yeah, what he's talking about is the modification of an existing complete gene. You're modifying an existing function. You are not explaining the existence of the original functions. Like, this is the entire point. This is why I do not comprehend how it is so difficult for atheists, other than living in a state of utter denial of basic logic, to conclude that because you can change something that already exists into something else, you have somehow explained how the original component came into existence in the first place, when it is dependent on all these other things that you cannot explain and would not make any sense in any other context. So he concedes, okay, maybe it's a code, maybe it's not a code, but it doesn't apply in this scenario. It doesn't apply to evolution. Oh, wait, yes, okay, it might. Oh, but it doesn't now. I mean, it's just like, it's like talking to somebody who does not actually comprehend what they're arguing, and then claiming that the person who is actually making logical arguments and actually has presented a case and did present evidence which from papers that defends, and experts that defends his position. Somehow I just made it all up. Is that because it seems like what is coming out of my opponent's mouth, and I just don't understand. Well, I think it's actually the reciprocal, and this is a case of atheist Fantasyland projection complex, which I have a video for, that is being embodied by my opponent tonight. And I hope perhaps he will take some time to go and learn the level of ignorance that he has on these things, even from other atheists. Like, why don't you go and watch John Perry's video on how the genetic code actually is a code, and how atheist activists need to stop saying it's not one, and it is a literal one, and it is a literal programming language. And that's an atheist saying that. I mean, go watch it and then get back with me. I concede.
Okay, John, as much time as you need.
Okay. So every argument that I've heard tonight is not actually addressing the question of whether or not evolution occurred. All of the arguments that he brought up are attacking whether or not God exists, or whether or not God created the organic materials needed for evolution to occur. But he has not actually attacked the mechanisms or anything that we have known for to prove evolution. Like, for instance, he hasn't attacked the fossils of whales, the obvious lineage that we have from whales back to land quadrupeds. I did not hear anything in this debate that actually attacked the idea that whales evolved from land quadrupeds. I did not hear any kind of argument against the fossil record. I did not hear any kind of evidence against the several driving forces of evolution, being mutation, natural selection, or sexual selection, genetic drift, any of those things that we've actually been able to observe happen in reality. I haven't heard any kind of argument or evidence that he's brought here that actually attacks the question of whether or not evolution happened. And the question of the debate as it's framed is naturalistic evolution, which would have been evolution that hasn't been guided by the hand of God, right? Or some supernatural entity or intelligence. And I don't think that any of his arguments have actually addressed that fact. And if you think that they have, I would love for you to actually think about which particular arguments are delineated from the existence of God in this debate. Because I really don't think that you can separate his arguments from an argument for God exists. In the debate, I actually conceded at one point, just for the sake of argument, mind you, that God exists and he created, all of the starting steps, everything that John thinks would need to be started in order for evolution to take over. He could have created all of that, but yet evolution still would have happened. Adaptation and evolution would have still happened. I didn't hear a coherent argument whatsoever in this entire debate that would refute the idea of that. So I guess that'll be it for me, and I can't wait for Q&A because I bet that it's just awesome.
All right. Well, thank you to the both of you for the closing statements. So it's been a heck of a debate. The audience has had a blast, and we have some solid questions. Of course, we're going to avoid any question that is just a straight out ad hominem, as the debaters have given us their time tonight and deserve the respect and the credit. So as always with the Q&A, though, the way we do it here is that if there is a bit of a back and forth, let's say John Maddox gets a question, Godless Engineer would like to respond to it, a little back and forth. The way that we end those back and forths is we like to make sure the person who the question was for gets the last word. Brother Smokey here has collected the questions and will take care of this portion. Smokey, thanks so much. I know the chat, we've had over 100 people in the chat.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of work for you, but you're earning your paycheck tonight there.
Well, yes, absolutely. You have to double it to that zero. You double another zero, and we're good. Yeah, absolutely. That's fair. Well, thank you so much. Yes, it was a very active chat and a wonderful debate. Debaters, both of you gentlemen, thank you so much. Really was a pleasure listening to you and go through these topics and this information. It was a wonderful time. So we'll run through our super chats, and yes, I will avoid the insults. I'll save that for Maddox later. So first off, of course, we have a $5 super chat from George Bond. Thank you so much, sir. Says, just because I can. So thank you so much for that. Very much appreciate it. Then we have from David P. Neff saying, happy birthday, LPP. Is it your birthday, Maddox?
It is. Yep.
How about that? Shout out to the birthday boy. Outstanding. Wonderful.
Appreciate it, David.
Thank that from David. Absolutely. Then we have from Stupid Horror Energy, of course. Some amino acids preferentially bind their codons or anticodons, which strongly suggests that the code has a stereochemical basis.
Oh, good Lord. You go read the papers on this whole deal, the stereochemical thing. Yeah, it's been theorized and it's been completely... Go read the 2017 universal origin of the universal genetic code, and there's a whole section on how the stereochemical aspect is not. That's a false assumption.
Okay, thank you for that. And Godless Engineer, would you like to give any response?
No, I don't know too much on that particular hyper-specific subject area. So, I mean, I'm fine to go with the experts on it.
Okay, perfect. And we do have a $5 super chat from Redefined Living. Didn't have any question, just wanted to send it, sending out love to the Brotherhood. So thank you so much for that, my friend.
Thanks so much for their Redefined Living. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Love all that support. Thank you guys for this. Absolutely. You help make it beautiful. You help make it fun. You help make it happen. Thank you to all you guys. Absolutely. Next, super chat from Sunflower for $5 said, for Godless Engineer, stem cells can become any type of human cell. Can you explain how stem cells know which type of cells, liver, skin, eye, etc., they become?
I'm not exactly well versed on how stem cells work exactly, but my best guess would be that there's a chemical reaction that happens that dictates what kind of cell that it would happen. That would be a very high level guess as to how it works. So I'm not exactly, like I said, I'm not an expert in this particular field, nor should I think anybody that's just doing general layman debates on the internet be experts in every single area. So I would just suggest going and looking at the actual literature on stem cells and how they do it. But my best guess would be a chemical reaction dictates what kind of cell they become.
Okay. And Maddox, would you like to respond?
Well, one of the things that we do know is that a large portion of that is controlled by epigenetics and methylation and a variety of other epigenetic factors that are done in a controlled manner by the read, write, and erase proteins, which control in a very organized and logic-based, predetermined outcome what type of cell it becomes.
Okay.
It's actually rather fascinating programming.
It is your question, Godless, so if you want to say anything, go ahead.
I feel like it's a baseless assertion to say that it's a predetermined kind of thing. I think that there are chemical reactions and that just chemical reactions occur and then more chemical reactions occur as a result of the previous chemical reactions. So it's literally just cause and effect. But regardless of all that, what it boils down to is a chemical reaction determining what kind of cell it becomes.
Okay. All right. Very good. Moving on. Jungle Jargon for $5. Thank you so much, sir, for Godless Engineer. Why are you such an object credit giver? I'm not sure if that makes any sense. Object credit giver?
I'm not sure what they mean by object credit giver. I don't know if maybe John has
giving credit to the object instead of the creator. Maybe he was trying to say something like that. Maybe it was a biblical reference.
Oh, well, I mean, I just don't see any I don't see any evidence anywhere that there is a creator, for one, and for two, I think that you would need to find persuasive evidence that it's not the natural world or the natural object that doesn't have whatever you're talking about. I think that you would need to show supernatural intervention in order for that question to make sense.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that answer. Appreciate it.
If predetermined outcomes are obvious and foreknowledge requirements are obviously needed and are able to be defined in order for to have the outcome, the logical deduction is that the pre-existing intelligent agent is required. Like this logic would apply in any other context, except for the most important one, which is how do we exist?
So, and I would say that, like I reiterated, or I'll reiterate what I said in the previous question towards me, and that's I disagree with the idea of foreknowledge or a predetermined chemical response to something. I just think that chemicals react as response to other chemical reactions or other actions in general.
Do you think that semantics are purely cause and effect?
I guess I really don't understand what you're trying to ask with this question.
Is semantic meaning, is it material or immaterial?
I still don't understand how this applies.
It's a very direct question. Does semantic meaning, is it immaterial or material?
I don't see how this has any kind of bearing on this particular question.
Well, you're literally claiming that everything is just pure cause and effect. I've already reiterate to you, and I will happily pull up the papers that state that deterministic chemistry no longer is, and cause and effect explains biological function because of all of the spatiotemporal variables. I'm not making these words up. Spatiotemporal is all over technical documents. So are you suggesting that the interpretation of semantic meaning that is required for spatiotemporal variables to be executed, are you suggesting that that is purely cause and effect?
I think chemical reactions are a part. As far as organic chemical reactions go in the natural world, they are organic chemical reactions happening, and then in response to that, other chemical reactions happen. So, however you want to take that as an answer, I think that we need to move on to the next question.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, let's move forward. Okay, very good. Next is probably more of a statement than a question, but a good one. And this is from Cocoa Puffer for $10. Thank you so much. Says, I appreciate the discourse and enjoy these debates. To my brothers and sisters in Christ, please remember 1 Peter 3:15, King James Version, of course. Probably go read it after this if you don't have it memorized. So thank you so much for that, brother. Very much appreciate it. Next is $2 from Nicholas Whitmire for Godless Engineer. Can Diet Coke be interpreted as having a code?
So this is one of the highly strawman things that John has lovingly perpetuated across y'all's community. As you could plainly hear in his opening statement in that first 7 minutes of nothingness, I said that it's no more of a code than Diet Coke is a code or Coke is a code. I've also said in the past that changes in genetic information is no different than the changes between Coke and Diet Coke as far as degradation goes. So, I mean, I think that, as far as the chemical that makes up Diet Coke or the various chemicals that make up Diet Coke, we could interpret that as information, but it still requires us to interpret it as that.
Okay.
So are you suggesting that there is a single human on this planet that would interpret the chemical structure of Coke or Diet Coke as a prescriptive information data set?
I've never said the word prescriptive at all. In fact, I would say most of it
information in any shape, form, or fashion that's remotely similar to the information that is in DNA.
I'm simply not going to dignify you with any kind of answers if you're just going to interrupt me in the middle of an answer that I'm giving you. So
you have literally tried
we can move on. We can move on to another question.
And dude, you're trying to like downplay this Coke Diet Coke thing. I literally have seen you in other debates on this exact subject use the Coke Diet Coke argument on multiple occasions, and I've got the video clips. So don't sit here and try and like downplay that whole aspect. Oh, there's not really that much of a difference. I mean, get out of here. Come on, dude. Answer the question. Do you think there is any code remotely similar to the genetic code in Coke or Diet Coke's chemical structure?
I think that any chemical code, including DNA code, would require interpretation on our part of it as code. So that's my stance on it, and I think that we can move to the next question.
Okay, so one final point. That logic is like suggesting that because our CPU can process programming language, but it's not actually us literally doing the interpretation. It's a mechanism. It's a translation device that there isn't actually a code being executed, because that's exactly what is occurring in biological systems. There's a translation component that is interpreting a code base, but you're saying that's not what's happening?
It's your question, Godless, and if you want to move on now at this point, we can.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, very good. All right, next question is from Pi373. Now, and you don't have to respond to this because I don't know. It's almost on the border of an ad hom. I don't feel like it is, but I'm just going to read it real quick because it's nothing vulgar. It says, GE, Godless Engineer, did what you had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner liquefy and chemically mutate into your thinking process? You can respond if you want. You don't have to.
Yeah, I would consider that to be an ad hom, so okay. I'm just not even going to dignify this.
Not
with
a problem.
sense.
I figured it was a little bit on the edge, but I have a real thick skin, and I always tell the debaters on MDD to throw everything at me. So I always just err on the side of trying to appease the audience, but appreciate that. Thank you. Next one, of course, from the great stupid whore Energy herself for $5, says proteins naturally bind to residues / atoms. Nuts and bolts don't do that. Maddox.
You know, Stupid Whore Energy talks so much shit, but has yet to have the CO Jones, proverbial or otherwise, to come on and back up their BS. So I will happily have an in-depth discussion with her whenever she wants. She comes to pretty much every live stream. Mic is open. Come on in. Let's discuss that.
All right. Very good. Thank you for that, sir. Okay. And next is from Shreeded for $5. Thank you so very much. Says, hey, Godless, I'm just learning about this stuff from these guys too, so I guess we can learn together. Any comment?
Well, I would say that Stupid Whore Energy doesn't have to present themselves in a debate capacity in order to have a valid comment. I mean, I'm regularly tempted to make the same kind of comment that John makes on various topics, but the fact is that if somebody doesn't want to come on and talk about a particular position, that doesn't invalidate their ability to make a solid point like Stupid Whore Energy did.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that point has zero relevance to the abiogenesis and the coding problem, and that would require like an hour discussion. So, yeah, if she wants to have the conversation, I'm more than willing to have the conversation.
Well, we can move on after I say this.
Sure.
What Stupid Whore Energy was actually pointing out was the fact that we don't have any natural explanations for nuts and bolts attaching themselves to steel beams, whereas we do have natural explanations for proteins adhering in the ways that they do. So
yeah, well,
it is directly relevant to
You could use magnets to hold two pieces of steel together. That doesn't mean that it is a remotely plausible scenario that the magnets would all be put in the exact correct spots to replace the bolts and cause the structure to be formed. Like
we can move on.
Yeah, let's let Godless, if you want to move on, we can. That's fine. Okay. And then the last super chat from George Bond for $5. Thank you so much, brother. Says, only because I'm enjoying this so much. Well, so glad to hear, and certainly hope the audience has enjoyed it as well. We can now move on to the regular questions that I collected, and these were just regular, normal, non-super chat questions that they put out there that I was able to be tagged in and noticed. So we'll move through here. Gavin Hurlman for Smoky Saints for question for Godless Engineer says, when is your wife going to let you debate me on Jesus mythicism?
Never.
Okay. Very good. Next
and that's not to say that she is the reason why I will never debate you. The fact that you're an asshole is the reason why I'll never debate you.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Okay. Next question from Caustic Soda. Question for Godless Engineer. Do we have a non-physical element to our makeup? If no, then why doesn't my head explode when I think of an elephant? If yes, then where are our memories stored?
In brain cells? I guess I don't understand why you would think that your head would explode when you think of elephants, other than you think that an elephant actually should manifest if we don't have brain cells. So I guess I just don't understand the reason for the question or why you would even ask it. So there you go.
Okay. Appreciate the response.
I'm not 100% sure on the meaning of the question. However, in the context of the data storage in the brain, the most recent data estimates is that we can store 2.5 petabytes of data in our brain, and we have the ability to process that information. So the question I would have for Godless would be, if we are storing and processing data in a stored syntax capacity in our brain cells, why would it not be logical to conclude that the ability for that to occur requires an operating system?
I guess I don't understand like what you mean by.
Do you think that there is a structured method for how data is stored in our brains, or it's just random chemical reactions?
Well, no, I mean, there's obviously a structure to our brains. We've been able to actually analyze that and everything, but I don't understand why that necessarily means that we need a God. We've been able to identify structures naturally occurring in nature, so it doesn't seem to be a good piece of evidence for God.
So how did we overcome the entropy the entropy demand in order to store the data?
I don't understand how your question's relevant to any of this. So if we can move on, that would be great.
Basic thermodynamics. Go ahead, Smokey.
Okay. All right. Moving on. Next question comes from Bill Morgan for Godless Engineer. As a fellow engineer, I ask, tell us what a feedback control system is. Does biochemistry have feedback control systems? Could feedback control systems happen by chance?
Well, I guess I don't really know how the feedback control systems really apply in this particular instance. I mean, you can look up what a feedback control system is on the internet.
Well, that was the second part of the question. He was asking, does biochemistry have feedback control systems?
I'm not an expert in the area, so I wouldn't be able to tell you that specifically. So again, I would probably just point people in the direction of the actual experts.
Okay, very good.
Okay, so yes, there are feedback control systems in biology, and so the second portion of the question was, do you think those can just pop into existence as an engineer?
I mean, I think that there are natural causes for things that happen in the natural world. So
you think feedback control logic and systems are just naturally occurring in any other context?
I mean, I'm not exactly sure about this particular context, so it would be difficult for
as
me
an engineer. Let's remove nature from the equation. As an engineer, do you think it is a remotely logical, plausible, or probable conclusion that a feedback control system could come into existence without an intelligent agent designing it?
Well, you can't remove the natural world from this because that's the primary delineating.
No, we're saying.
I'm not done talking there, John. This is my question.
I'm asking you a question.
This is an adult conversation.
Let's let him respond, Maddox.
I get the supreme dodge agent over here.
No, I'm primarily saying that you can't just remove the natural element from it, because obviously, if humans have designed a feedback system, then it obviously needs an intelligence behind it. But what we're talking about is the natural world, and the natural world can definitely develop things without the need of an intelligence to intervene. So, if there indeed are feedback systems in nature, then they develop naturally.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that answer. All right. Moving on. Let's see. For Maddox, can you ask Maddox to repeat what he said about the longest oligo? I don't know if I'm catching that right. Did he say that the longest non-enzymatic oligopeptide was 20 residues, or did I mishear?
No, I was referring to RNA 121.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you for that. Next is from George Bond. A question for Godless Engineer. How did evolution get 4 million on-off switches in the non-coding region, the part Evos claimed was junk DNA?
Again, I'm not an expert, so I wouldn't be able to give a super precise, explanation for this. But I think the fact that there are those things in those particular areas would highlight how natural processes can do things that are often counterintuitive to us.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I almost feel compelled. I saved this question just out of fun, but I figured since I had kind of almost thrown by accident ad hom at Godless, I should throw one at Maddox too, just to make sure it's fair. So this is from Caitlin Chloe. says, apparently, can you ask John Maddox if he's considering taking some kind of communication classes, or if he's considering not being a dick might be a more effective in communication?
Well, if Caitlin, as well as my opponent, had paid attention to my opening statement, I made it very clear that I was giving no quarter from here on out to my opponents who do nothing but attempt to dodge, claim ignorance, and avoid any rational, logical conclusion and remain bent over to the talking points of the atheist community that completely suspend logic and rational thought in order to reach their conclusions, while simultaneously claiming that I am a god of the gaps, clinging to faith and desperation. So if that makes me a dick, then so be it.
Well, no. I mean, what makes you a dick is how you communicate. It's not the giving quarter part. It's the how you communicate things. I mean, you very obviously communicated like what I can only describe as a child during this entire debate. I think what she was trying to get across is that maybe if you change your communication style, you might be a bit more convincing.
I understood what she was saying, and I was more approaching you as the adolescent child who is refusing to remotely consider things like an adult. It's kind of fascinating, to be honest.
Well, let's not let it necessarily devolve to that here, because that's fine. Appreciate and by the way, thank you, Maddox, for responding to the ad hom. That definitely you took that in full scope.
I mean, my opponent decided he wanted to get a little jab in too, so I responded to his ad hom. All fair in love and war.
All fair, and we're moving on. So so on to the next one. So from Chris Keith says, for Godless Engineer, epigenetics research would be further along if not for Evos thinking junk DNA was junk because they wanted it to fit their paradigm. X of neo-Darwinism holding science back. Says, thanks. This is also a question in respect to how you believe in ID.
Okay. It just sounded like a statement to me. It's fine if they want to be wrong. Plenty of people are wrong all the time.
Well, I think the question was about the junk DNA. It was research would be further along if not for evolutionists thinking junk DNA was junk. I guess it was more of a thing. You don't have to respond.
Well, I mean, that just seems like a baseless assumption. So, I mean, I would just say citation needed.
So there were 17 papers published this January, which you can go refer to, Nature, all by medical researchers. And I read all 17 of them, and I can think of at least 5 where the researchers made direct statements about how they didn't have some of the technology, and they would have more technology if it had not been considered junk, and that we actually needed to look into redefining what it was in order to give them better tools to find and solve disease.
Okay. And Godless, it is your question, so you can take the final word if you like.
Well, I mean, I would say that science has been wrong in the past, and that's just in general. Science has been wrong. So it doesn't really seem pertinent to strictly place this on evolution. Because, I mean, science being wrong and correcting itself is a common thing that happens in science. So to specifically say that evolutionists were the ones holding it back, I don't think that that's accurate. And maybe John can send me his citations for them saying that evolution, or evolutionists, as you guys like to say, are specifically the ones that are holding science back.
Okay.
I love it when atheists put evolutionist into quote unquote like it's not actually a real word. It's in the dictionary.
Okay. I have to give them the last word every time you do that, Maddox, right?
I really don't care, whether or not it is a real word now, because dictionaries are descriptive, not prescriptive, and whether you want to call us evolutionists or just normal fucking scientists doesn't really matter.
So now you know the difference between prescriptive and descriptive?
I've always known the difference between
Oh,
prescriptive.
cool. And you can't determine that in the context of genetics?
No, let's go on to the next question.
Okay.
Wow.
All
So
right,
you played dumb earlier. Congratulations, bro.
Okay, let's move on. Okay. Question from Ian Spiker says, could godless engineer steelman the argument for intelligent design?
Okay. Well, basically that an intelligent designer needed to especially create all the forms of life that we have here on Earth, and that evolution didn't occur, and that species haven't evolved over long periods of time. So essentially that an intelligent designer is needed to create all life forms as they exist now.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. Appreciate it. Next question from Luca for Maddox. What chemical laws are broken in biology?
I didn't say laws were broken. I said that the normal reaction without a specific environment can only be accomplished by enzymes and forcing the outcome. It's not that the outcome can't occur. It's just not that it wouldn't be the natural occurrence in the environment.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. Godless, did you want to add anything? Okay. No. Very good. Next question, also from Luca. This is to Maddox. Photosynthesis was at least after a while eukaryotes were a thigh, at least. I'm not sure. That maybe came out wrong.
Oh, man. It's still extraordinarily early on your own timeline. And then if you want to really get into how it's eukaryotes, let's talk about how the heck we went from prokaryote to eukaryote and somehow derive dual authentication security protocols. When you figure that one out, we can talk about photosynthesis.
So on the UC Berkeley site for evolution, they've explained how most likely we went from prokaryotic to eukaryotic, and that's other prokaryotic cells invading other prokaryotic cells, and then those cells form a symbiotic relationship with each other in order to survive. And what they found was in the laboratory, this happened with a set of cells, and when they introduced chemicals to kill the invading prokaryotic cell, they found that the cells that had incorporated the prokaryotic cells into their structure also died. And so they speculate that this is how we went from prokaryotic to eukaryotic, by prokaryotic cells invading other prokaryotic cells and developing a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. And moving on. Next question for Maddox from Gutsick Gibbon, of course. Erica, can you ask John what % of his papers present a problem for abiogenesis without presenting a solution? Also, why experiments in statistical physics and computational bio don't count?
Repeat that, please.
It says, can you ask John what % of his papers present a problem for abiogenesis without presenting a solution? That's the first part.
Okay, so the first part of that is, I'd say pretty much all of them have a problem, potential hypothetical solution that they're putting forth, or it's a complete analysis of here's the things that have been presented, here's why they don't work, here's why this one may or may not be more likely. The point is that the solutions that are being presented are all 100% hypothetical and are not actually being backed up in research. And a lot of the statistical modeling, it's purely theoretical and like completely, if you actually go and read a lot of those supposed projections of and models of how this could happen, if you actually read through them, you'll literally find at different stages along the way, it's like, oh, well, this isn't actually feasible. But if all of these things happened perfectly and we didn't actually have to have the entirety of it work, then maybe this could happen. And I'm sorry, that is not a remotely plausible solution to the problem.
Okay, and the second part.
Are you an expert? I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you an expert in the field to where you can make that determination?
This is literally conceded by many of the origin of life researchers. And it's gotten to the point that even people like Lee Cronin, he's not even trying to do organic origin of life. He's trying to do inorganic life, origin of life research, because the premise of doing what we're like biology just isn't even remotely feasible anymore.
So take that as a no.
I'll take that as a go read papers and get back to me where they claim that they have actually come remotely close to proving any of the things that are hypothetically put forth.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. All right. And the last question from Straight Talker TV, the Ocho8. Yes. Good friend of the channel, good friend of the community. Thank you so much, sir. Says, is a mutation a defection from original perfect code for Godless Engineer?
I don't think that there's an idea of a perfect code. Like, I don't really think that you could actually describe what the perfect code would be. Mutations are changes between different genetic codes, and the way in which those changes occur and the frequency in which they occur are the main driving force behind evolution. And there are several mechanisms in which those changes can occur. Sexual selection, natural selection, genetic drift, as well as others. So, I hope that answered your question.
Okay.
Well, so I got a response. I would argue that you could determine what would have been the perfect code for a specific function, especially given the fact that we are now being able to prove that what we used to think were just synonymous replacements of codons actually in many cases have negative outcomes, and even to the extent of the correct amino acid is inserted, but because the translational pausing protocols are not followed, which are derived from the secondary syntax, we're actually seeing negatives. So there was actually a perfect structure, which was both the appropriate amino acids as well as the space and time placement of it into the protein.
How would you know that it's perfect?
How would I know that it's perfect?
Yes.
Well, let's see. You have a hypercomplex three-dimensional structure that can only form based on specific variables. And if you negate any of those variables, it doesn't form correctly. I would say that means that there was a perfect structure and now it's not.
Who's to say that another structure couldn't form the exact same thing in just a different way? It would end up with the same product. You would need to be able to delineate other ways in which that could have happened and determine which one is the.
So there are more than a few functions in biology that, from physicists and chemists, everybody else, they publicly delineate as the ultimate and the calibrated to the extreme. Like it cannot possibly be better than this. So if we recognize there are biological functions that as the result of the code that creates them cannot be optimized any further to the extremes of physics, I would say yes, that would be the literal definition of perfection.
Okay, I would just implore everybody to always ask, how do you know? And follow the evidence where it goes.
Okay. All right. Well,
so this guy claims you have to go talk to the experts. I literally am just referring to something that's been said by experts, and now he's claiming that doesn't really count. Got it.
Okay. Well, we'll close that out with our question period. And thanks sincerely to both debaters and all of the wonderful people in chat, keeping it so lively and providing us such wonderful, interesting, and engaging questions for our debaters. Gentlemen, the sincerest thanks to both of you for your time and energy and effort in this engagement this evening. It was entertaining and very profitable. Thank you both so much.
Thanks, guys.
Amen. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I would say thanks, everybody. It's fun. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just going to say, amen, Brother Smokey. Thanks to the chat. It's been a very lively chat. Thanks for the super chats. Thanks for the awesome questions. It was a really engaging Q&A. So if it wasn't for our audience, you guys make this channel. You guys are rock stars, as Smokey said. So yeah, let's hand it over to the debaters to give just some final words, plug their channels, whatever they feel is necessary. And like Smokey said, I want to thank you for giving us your time today. It's been a couple hours and it flew by. So go ahead, gentlemen.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. Thanks, everybody, for joining in on this debate. And I hope that you guys will check out my channel, especially if you want to leave some interesting comments. I always love having plenty of quality things to talk about on my channel. So I'm sure you guys can leave plenty of comments there. It's just Godless Engineer. You guys can come over there and watch my content. Tell me what you think. You can find me on Twitter at Godless Engineer, as well as Instagram and other social media places. Tonight, I'm very disappointed in the quality of John's debate. Because I really don't think that he actually addressed the question of whether or not evolution happened. I think that he has sufficiently addressed the question of whether or not God exists as far as his arguments go. Not that they have merit, but that he actually put forth arguments against that particular question instead of what this entire debate was supposed to be about. I don't feel compelled by any of his arguments that evolution didn't happen, and I don't think that any of his arguments would support the conclusion that evolution did not happen. So thank you again for having me on, and I appreciate you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Godless Engineer. We appreciate you as well. Check out his channel, like he said, if you enjoyed what he had to say here today. So, John Maddox, over to you. Final words?
Enjoyed the debate. It was fun. For everybody who's something to do after this, I'm going to head over to Nephilim Free's channel. I think he's going to do an after show. I'm going to bounce over there for a few minutes before I pass out. We'll go to my channel. It's Logical, Plausible, Probable, and subscribe. Love to get feedback from y'all as well, and ideas for different videos. In the context of tonight's debate, I find it very fascinating that my opponent claims I did not make opposition arguments to evolution and only was in favor of God. My position was that an intelligent agent is required for life to exist, and that naturalistic evolution is not a valid conclusion. My opponent ducked, dodged, claimed that my arguments were not relevant, and or did not understand the point that I was making. So to claim that I didn't actually make a case against evolution, I don't really know what to say other than perhaps do more research. But that aside, had a great time. Hope the audience enjoyed it. And we'll come back to SFT for more debates in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, John Maddox. Once again, go check out John's channel, like and subscribe. And okay, so it looks like there's an after show on Nephilim Free's channel, so go check that out. Looks like there typically is an after show almost after every single debate we have. So regardless of whose channel it is, we will give them a shout out regarding their after show. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks so much to the debaters. Thanks so much, Smokey. You did a great job with the Q&A. Thanks, Praise, for the producing of the debate. And I think we're going to hand it over to you, Praise, to shut it down for us.
I'm sorry, Ken. You cut out there. They have a 15 what?
The whales have a 15-foot penis. I didn't cut out. You heard me. Google it yourself. The whales have a 15-foot penis.
I'm sorry, Ken. You cut out there. They have a 15 what?
Are you a pervert or something? Okay. The whales have a 15-foot penis.